This
Okay.
conference will now be recorded.
All right, perfect. So welcome everybody to this meeting of the Montachusett Metropolitan Planning Organization. I will now call this meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is introductions. So Brian, if you want to call the roll, see which members are present.
Yeah, we have Derek Cravat representing Mass DOT Secretary and CEO Gina Fiandaca.
Yep, Derek Vet here.
Ian Sullivan from Mass DOT Highway Division.
Ann Sullivan, District 3 Project Development Engineer, representing MassDOT Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
Nick Erickson, City of Fitchburg. Nick, you there? I see his microphone turning on, so there might be some issues. We can circle back to that, I guess. Mark Piermarini, City of Leominster.
Yep, Mark Primarini here, City of Leominster.
George Kahali, Mark.
Present.
And Tim Kilhart, Subregion 3.
Present.
Okay, we have 6 signatories, so we do have a quorum as of now.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Brian. The next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone present that would like to make a comment at this time? All right. Seeing none, if you do have a comment at any point, please feel free to use the raise hand function on the bottom of the screen or type into the chat and we'll be sure to call on you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the February 15th, 2023 meeting minutes. So I'll ask for a motion and second to endorse.
I make a motion to accept the minute as presented.
Second, if you
Second.
can hear me.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, who did the second, please?
Okay. Did someone make a motion?
Was it
George
Tim?
Cahaley made the motion,
Oh, George did. Okay. My audio may have
and
cut
there was
out.
a second. I just didn't catch who it was.
Was it Tim Kilhart?
I didn't, but I'll second it. That's fine.
Okay, sounds good. So motion now having been made and seconded. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All right, seeing none, go ahead and call the roll, Brian.
Derek Cravat, Mass DOT.
Yes.
Ian Sullivan, Mass DOT Highway.
Yes.
Nick Erickson, City of Fitchburg.
Yes, can you hear me this time?
Yep, we got you now. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mark Piermarini, Leominster.
Yes.
George Kahali, Mark.
Yes.
Tim Kilhart, Subregion 3.
Yes.
Okay, that passes.
All right, thank you, everybody. Next on the agenda is the statewide long-range transportation plan, standing item. Any updates, Chris?
Yeah, brief update. Sorry, lost my screen. So for the past several months, we've been hosting some meeting in a box focus group outreach efforts with the regions, and in the Montachusett region, we held one in February with the Health Equity Partnership of North Central Massachusetts, known as Chinon 9. So I just wanted to share that we're beginning an analysis of the results of the survey within that meeting, as well as just the overall conversations we've been having with this group and others. So we're still drafting that sort of presentation internally, but when it's finished, I'll share that with the MPO. And that's all I have. Thanks, Derek.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Any questions for Chris? All right, seeing none, we can move on to agenda item 5, which is the Montachusett Federal Fiscal Year 2023 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. Is there anything under this one, Brian, or is this just a placeholder in case we did have
Just a
something?
placeholder. We have no
Yep.
amendments.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so with that, we'll move then to agenda item 6, which is the MassDOT performance measures. We have 2 presentations on these today. One is on performance measure area 2 for pavement and bridge condition, and second on performance measure area 3, which is on system performance measures. We'll start with PM2. I think we have, looks like Jack Moran and Annabelle Shine here on the call from MassDOT's Highway Division to present on this. So I'll turn it over to my highway colleagues to present on the pavement and bridge condition targets. So take it away, and I think the presentation will be queued up here for you to walk through.
And if you'd like control of the screen to do the presentation, we can do that too. I do have it up on the screen now, but so whatever is good for you.
You there, Jack?
I am. I think Annabelle's audio is down.
Okay.
Give us just 1 second. Thanks for your patience. I can get us started here. And if Annabelle gets back on again, I'll pass the mic over. So thanks for the opportunity today. We will be talking about the infrastructure condition portion of federal performance management. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. And Annabelle, if you get on, just give a holler. Four major areas in this presentation. First one will be just a look at the measures themselves, what they consist of, and then we'll review the first performance period, and then we'll move on to a little bit on the regional distribution of the national highway system, bridges and pavements, and then ultimately provide our targets themselves. So move on to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this performance measure framework created by Federal Highway is entirely focused on the national highway system. Oh, I think Annabelle's on. Annabelle, you want to try?
Is it working now?
It is. Volume's a little low.
Okay, I'll try to speak loudly. Sorry, it just stopped working. But I can take over from here.
Great.
Okay. So as Jack went through the measures we're going to go through, so we're going to talk about what exactly we're measuring. So our measures are exclusively focused on the bridges and pavement of the NHS. And the NHS is a network of strategic roadways identified through legislation in the mid-1990s, which includes the interstate system and other roads serving airports, military bases, rail and truck terminals, and other intermodal transport facilities. So MassDOT owns the entirety of the interstate system, and non-interstate roads have shared jurisdiction of approximately 2/3 DOT and 1/3 municipal. So the interstate pavement is measured separately from the non-interstate, both with respect to percent good, where a higher percentage is desired, and percent poor, where a lower percentage is desired. The pavement condition is measured using composite indices that look at ride quality and other distresses, including cracking and rutting. And this measure is similar to the MassDOT Pavement Serviceability Index, or PSI. And as you can see, the bridge condition is also measured as percent good and percent poor. The size of the bridge is taken into account as the condition is expressed as the share of bridge area within either condition state. Bridge area is calculated as the deck area, so the riding surface of each bridge. And there are approximately 29 million square feet of NHS bridges in Massachusetts, and the average bridge size is 14,000 square feet. Next slide, please. So this slide illustrates our progress towards targets during the first performance period, and there was also a phased implementation for some of the measures. Our process for target setting involves the forecasting of asset deterioration and the effects of investment in each 2-year increment. We learned a lot from the first cycle, and 2021 conditions were largely close to target, as you can see here. Next slide, please. So starting with pavement, this slide demonstrates the distribution of the interstate system in lane miles across the state. And the interstates, as I said before, are completely owned by MassDOT. And as you can see in the graph here, Montachusett contains a small amount of interstate pavement, and I-190 and small portions of 495 are the sole interstates in this region. Next slide, please. This slide provides the statewide distribution of non-interstate NHS roadways and also includes the share of municipal and state ownership, as you can see in the green and orange. So there are 498.77 lane miles of non-interstate NHS in Montachusett, with approximately 174 lane miles owned by municipalities, and this includes State Routes 68, 13, and 40. Next slide, please. Montachusett has 2% of the interstate system with about 52 lane miles and 7% of the non-interstate NHS system, 35% of which is owned by municipalities. Consistent with most regions across the state, Montachusett municipally owned NHS pavement is comparatively worse than state-owned pavement, as you can see in this table here. Next slide. So on to targets starting with interstate. For this next performance period, we're proposing fairly conservative targets for interstate condition. We are forecasting consistent percent good interstate pavement for 23 and 25. We observed a slight decline over the first performance period, but we don't foresee a major change in good pavement. As of 2021 conditions, which is shown here as the base condition, there was no poor pavement on the interstates. There is a maximum condition threshold on the poor measure of 5%, which was established in the regulation, and we have selected a 2% target, which is well below the federal maximum. For these and all measures, we have the opportunity to reassess our 4-year target at the mid-performance period. Next slide. So the non-interstate NHS network includes both limited access roadways, for example, and more local roadways with pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. We've been making progress on non-interstate conditions in recent years, but are selecting conservative targets at the outset of this performance period, which we will reassess at mid-performance period. Next slide. So moving on to bridges, this slide provides regional and ownership share of NHS bridges. Next slide. There are 112 NHS bridges within Montachusett borders. The majority are owned by the DOT, that should say 109, and 3 are owned by municipalities. And this represents about 2% of the Massachusetts NHS bridge inventory. As you can see in this table, Montachusett bridges are in better condition than statewide. Next slide. So this performance period is timed with the programming of additional bridge funding through the state-authorized Next Generation Bridge Program and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Bridge Formula Program. The initial investment of these funds, oh no, can no one hear me anymore?
I can hear you.
We can hear you, Annabelle.
Sorry, I just saw Tim's comment.
Yeah, it might just be
I'm
Tim.
not sure what's happening with Tim.
Okay, it's just a few more points anyways. But just that the initial investment of these funds has been to preservation projects with more complicated rehabilitation and replacement projects that are starting to advertise this year. So we are therefore forecasting steady state for both percent good and percent poor measures, and we expect improvements within each measure in the next performance period. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. We're happy to discuss any of these proposed targets, and thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Annabelle. Great job. Are there any questions for Annabelle at this time on the pavement and bridge targets? Okay, seeing no questions, part of this process is that both MassDOT and all of the MPOs across Massachusetts are required to adopt targets in this area. So if the MPO is comfortable, I would entertain a motion to adopt the state targets for both pavement and bridge condition as presented by Annabelle.
This is Ann Sullivan. I'll make that motion.
I second Mark Pimmerini.
Okay, great, thank you. So motion having been made and seconded, are there any comments or questions on this or the process? Okay, I'll just add for a bit of context, the MPO is, in adopting these targets, the MPO is just committing to assisting MassDOT achieve what we've set out as far as the targets go through the TIP target funding program and a coordinated process with MassDOT through programming projects in our interstate, non-interstate payment program and our larger bridge program, which any projects in those programs will appear in the TIP for the region. And it's just all part of this process of measuring progress toward achieving these targets and making sure we're keeping these in a relatively good shape. So just wanted to add that for a bit of context, but I know there's a motion and second out there. So Brian, if you want to call the roll, we'll vote on this adoption of these targets.
Derek Cravat, Mass DOT.
Yes.
Ann Sullivan, Mass DOT Highway.
Yes.
Dick Erickson, Fitchburg.
Yes.
Mark Pimmerini, Leominster.
Yes.
George Kahali, Mart.
Yes.
Brian Croto, Subregion 1.
Yes.
And I think Tim Kilhart just recently left the meeting. But just in case, Tim Kilhart, Subregion 3. Even without Tim, we have a quorum because we're up to 6 now again. So
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you, everybody. I think the next item within this agenda item is performance measure area 3, which is a catch-all for system performance measures. And I believe Chris Clem from MassDOT Planning will be presenting this one. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Eric. Brian, do you need me to share my screen or?
Yep, I'll try to. Okay, you should be able to share.
Okay. Let's see. This one. All right. Can everybody see it? Or is it in tiny mode?
It's not full screen, but look, it's getting there. Yep, that looks good.
Better? Can you see my notes on the side or no?
No, we can't see the notes.
All right, that's good. Okay, good. So I got about half the screen up. So if I'm going too fast, please let me know. So for a little bit of background, FHWA, a rule from FHWA in 2016 established these 3 performance measures that state DOTs and MPOs must track collectively. We heard about PM1, that's safety, last month. We just heard from Highway Division on PM2, and now I'll discuss PM3, which is sort of a catch-all for system reliability and performance. So the 3 measures under this performance measure include reliability, which is level of travel time reliability, both on the interstate and non-interstate national highway system, and the level of truck travel time reliability. And then the last 2 measures, which include congestion, which measures percentage of non-single occupancy vehicle travel and peak hour excessive delay, as well as emissions, actually don't need to be voted upon by the Montachusett MPO. FHWA doesn't require every single MPO to vote on these more UZA specific measures, specifically the percentage of non-single occupancy vehicle travel and peak hour excessive delay. And for emissions, the region does not contain any communities that are subject to air quality conformity standards. So both the congestion and emissions performance measures don't apply here. So we will only be reviewing the statewide reliability measures, which are the first 2. So level of travel time reliability, or LOTTR, is based on the amount of time it takes to drive the length of a road segment. The metric is the percentage of person miles traveled that are considered reliable. And the most important piece to take away here is that reliability does not necessarily mean uncongested. It simply means that you can reliably predict the time that it will take you to travel the length of a road segment, regardless of congestion or other conditions. And these reporting requirements must be on the statewide level. MassDOT did adopt these targets on December 16th, 2022, and MPOs are required to adopt within the next several months or 180 days. So diving into LOTTR, this slide has the methodology we use to calculate the targets for this particular measure. And we examine how long it takes to travel across all roadway segments and compare longer travel times, those at the 80th percentile, to the median travel times, or those at the 50th percentile, within each segment across different times of day. And those different times of day are noted in the bottom of the screen in the green box. And it's a little bit confusing at first, but breaking it down with an example is pretty helpful, I found. So, for example, if the 80th percentile travel time on a given road segment is 60 seconds, and the median travel time on that same segment is 30 seconds, then the level of travel time reliability would be 2, meaning it is unreliable in this case, even if that difference only occurs during one of those time windows on the bottom. And we repeat this calculation for each of those time windows, and if all are below 1.5 for that particular road segment, then that segment is considered reliable. And so for reporting purposes, we use the percentage of person miles traveled that are reliable. So in this case, we want a high percentage on this metric because that means travel times are more reliable and predictable. This slide represents travel time reliability at the interstate level. And the first year we started to collect data on this measure was in 2017. And as you can see, the trend between 2017 and 2019 was heading in the wrong direction, with roadways becoming less reliable during that period of time. And then in 2020, as a result of significantly fewer vehicles on the road at the start of the pandemic, travel time reliability shot up to about 94%. And then in 2021, reliability went down slightly, but remained considerably higher than pre-pandemic levels. And from here, we used prior data to project out a potential trend line, given that each year we have data for, which resulted in a trend line showing decreasing reliability. And MassDOT chose to develop 2- and 4-year targets that represented improved reliability over pre-pandemic levels, while still being realistic given the trend lines that we are seeing. And I do want to remind folks that at the time of target setting, we were relying on 2022 data as it was available, and that was only up to the month of July, and that's noted at the bottom of the screen. So the 4-year target, the 2-year target of 74% represents a 6% improvement in reliability since the last target, which was established for 2022. And the 4-year target of 76% represents an even greater increase to reflect MassDOT's goal of improving reliability and accounting for external factors as well, such as continued work from home trends and other MassDOT initiatives that aim to improve travel time reliability as a whole. And we set the 4-year target to be a little bit more aspirational, since we do have the opportunity to revisit the target in 2 years. This slide represents travel time reliability at the non-interstate level. And unlike interstate reliability, there was an increase in non-interstate reliability pre-pandemic between 2018 and 2019. And this is potentially due to the fact that non-interstate roadways are not used quite as often for commuting, and therefore may not be subject to the same levels of congestion and unpredictability as interstates. And we really see reliability spike in 2020, again, due to the pandemic and fewer cars on the road. But the metric has since begun to decline as more cars do return to the roadways. And at the time the measures were set, again, we were using the best available data in 2022. So it was 89% at that time but it's possible that if we do have a full year of data for that year, it could actually show worsening reliability towards the end of the year, because we were, continued to emerge from the pandemic, return to office plans began to take shape, and people are just out and about traveling much more for any variety of reasons. So for that reason, we weren't comfortable just putting forth targets with increasing reliability that follow a similar pattern shown on the trend line. We went with a near-term target below the trend line at 85%, and we were comfortable with this because the target still represents an increase over the 2022 target of 80%, and we wanted to walk the line between what is aspirational and achievable. And the 4-year target is set at 87%, to represent additional improvements in non-interstate travel time reliability. So the next measure is truck travel time reliability, or TTTR. This is based on the amount of time it takes trucks to drive the length of a road segment. Reporting requirements here are also on the statewide level, and we're only required to report on the interstate system. Unlike LOTTR, which shows the percentage of road miles that are considered reliable, truck travel time reliability is represented as an index, and this index compares the 95th percentile of travel time of trucks carrying freight to the 50th percentile time, or the median. And the 95th percentile is more aggressive than the 80th percentile that's used for the other measure, to indicate the importance and economic implications of trucks being on time. So using the previous example, where the 80th percentile travel time on a given segment is 60 seconds, the 95th percentile travel time here would be 80 seconds. And if the median travel time is still 30 seconds, this means the value for the index would be 2.6 instead of 2, indicating a higher value for trucks. And this is very similar to the other measure again, but this measure is just reported as an index and not a percentage. And since a lower number indicates less variability in travel time, the direction we want the trend line for this measure to go is down. So when looking at past values of the truck travel time reliability index, there really wasn't a clear pattern between 2017 and 19. It was generally flat, and then it improved during 2020 when the pandemic began, and then began to move in the wrong direction in 2021 and again 2022. And given the worsening reliability since 2020 and a lack of clear direction pre-pandemic, excuse me, the projected trend line for truck travel time reliability does show worsening reliability, seen as the increase in the trend line or index in this case. So similar to the last measure, we wanted to walk the line between what is achievable and what is also aspirational, while still showing an improvement over the previous targets that were established for 2022. And this, and from here we landed on 2-year target being a little more cautious as we wait to see how pandemic-related travel impacts materialize. And this is set at 1.8, and then the 4-year target is set at 1.75. And that's all I have. I went pretty fast, and I can't see anyone with my screen sharing, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I can get back to you all.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? Okay. Well, seeing none, similar to the last performance measure area, there is a requirement for MPOs to endorse the state targets for PM3. So I would ask for a motion and second to adopt the targets that Chris presented.
I make a motion to accept the presentation as presented.
Okay, thank you, George. Is there a second?
Ann Sullivan, I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Ann. So motion having been made and seconded, I'll ask one more time. Any questions on the process or comments? All right. Seeing none, go ahead and call the roll. Brian?
Derek Cravat, Mass DOT.
Yes.
Ian Sullivan, Mass DOT Highway Division.
Yes.
Mark Pimarini, Leominster.
Yes.
Nick Erickson, Fitchburg.
Yes.
George Kahali, Mart.
Yes.
Ryan Croto, Subregion 1.
Yes.
And Tim Kilhart, Subregion 3.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. Next on the agenda is the federal fiscal year 2024 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program. I'll hand it over to Brian to talk through the programming scenarios for the upcoming TIP.
Okay, thank you. So the main focus of this meeting will be to select a target listing scenario to develop into the draft TIP, which we'll review at next month's meeting and release for a 21-day public comment period. So the target project listing, again, is where MPO has discretion on which projects get placed in one of the 5 years of the TIP. So that's the main focus. But before that, we also have been given our statewide projects. This is these projects selected and prioritized by the state. These are all the projects in our region. We have this preliminary list right now, which we'll also include in the TIP. In fiscal year 2024, we have Fitchburg bridge replacement related work on Water Street over Boulder Drive and the Putnam Railroad. Athol intersection improvements at Crescent Street and Chestnut Hill Avenue. Athol, Phillipston, Templeton bridge preservation at 8 bridge crossings along Route 2. Fitchburg and Ashby resurfacing and related work on Route 31. And Fitchburg, Leominster, Twin Cities Rail Trail construction phase 2. In 2025, we have Hubbardston bridge replacement, Williamsville Road over the Barnchart River. Sterling stormwater drainage improvements at Wachusett Reservoir on Route 110. Lancaster, Leominster interstate maintenance on I-190. In Athol, bridge replacement, Main Street over the Boston, Maine Railroad. Leominster, Fitchburg, Twin Cities Rail Trail construction, phase 2, again, listed in 2025. And the Athol bridge replacement over the Boston, Maine Railroad is listed twice here in 2025. That's because it's a separate funding source, so it's funded with 2 different sources in 2025. That's why it's listed twice. In 2026, Harvard Lancaster bridge replacement, Jackson Road over the Nashua River. In Fitchburg, improvements at Memorial Middle School, which is a Safe Routes to School project. Gardner bike path bridge construction, North Central Pathway over Route 140. And again, Fitchburg, Leominster, Twin Cities Rail Trail, phase 2. In 2027, what you see on the list is the first project, Harvard resurfacing and box widening on Air Road. That actually doesn't belong on the statewide list. That's carried in our target project listing. Initially, we had this, and it seems like it was misplaced in the statewide listing, but we're carrying it as a target project, as we'll see later. And Gardner bike path bridge construction, North Central Pathway over Route 140. So that is the statewide section, which we'll have in the TIP as well. Next handout is this is was presented at last month's meeting as well. This is all of our target eligible projects, along with their associated transportation evaluation scores. The only difference with this handout this month is the addition of Winchendon intersection improvements at Blair Square and Sterling intersection improvements related work on 140 and 62. These new projects have been scored. Winchendon project has a TEC score of 33 and Sterling has a score of 30. So both worthy projects, and we've gotten some additional information on these, and they seem to be moving forward as well. This is just for your information. This is our transportation evaluation criteria score sheet. So these scores in this sheet, this is what we use to analyze these projects, and they correlate to the scores on this handout here. If you have any questions on this, if you get around to looking at this, or if you want to go over your project, or if you have any questions, reach out to us and we can set up a time to do that as well. Okay, so the main focus is dealing with our project list in the target section. So I have 3 scenarios for review today. And as I mentioned in the last few meetings, the main issue that we have this year is Leominster reconstruction on Route 12, which is our only project listed federal fiscal year 2024. This project initially was suggested to move back at least 1 year when we have been discussing it with Mass DOT. Due to design issues and right-of-way issues specifically, there's some concern that this project might not make 2024, so it would be probably safer at a later year. However, the issue is we have no other project that is ready for 2024, so essentially we wouldn't have any projects listed, and those target funds would basically revert back to the state to be spent statewide. So ideally, we'd have this project year funded with different projects. However, the situation we're in, it's either, as of now, Leominster Route 12, or unfortunately, no other projects ready. But this isn't necessarily the case. There is some reason to hold out hope on this Leominster project. And being the case that there is no project readily available to take its place, in scenario 1, we consider keeping this project in fiscal year 2024, amending it back at a later date if needed. And this allows us to maintain our current order with the rest of the list and add 2 new projects from the appendix to fiscal year 2028. Those projects would be Fitchburg reconstruction of John Fitch Highway and Sterling intersection improvements on 140 and 62. Basically, we chose these 2 projects from the appendix because based on what we know now, they have the best chance to advance in design, and we know there are other projects to consider as well. But for now, these seem the most project ready for 2028. So this is scenario 1. Scenario 2 gives a look at, you can see the description below the scenario 2 headline. This would be what we would end up with if we moved Leominster Route 12 back from 2024 through to 2025. Basically, it would leave 2024 unspent. Also would push most projects back on the list, with the exception of Harvard box widening on Air Road, which is currently scheduled for 2026 and 27. So Ashburnham Route 101 project, currently scheduled for 2025, would move back to 2026 in this scenario. Templeton reconstruction of 68 would move from 26 to 27. Clinton reconstruction of Sterling Street and Athol intersection improvements on 2A and Brookside Road would move from 27 to 28. And we'd be able to move 2 additional projects from the appendix into 2028. Winchendon intersection improvements at Blair Square and Sterling intersection improvements on 140 and 62. So the effect of moving that Leominster project back, although we may need to do it, if it's not ready in time, it will have a drastic effect on other projects' placement on the list. Finally, scenario 3, and when we presented these scenarios to the MJTC at last week's meeting, this was a preferred scenario by that group. The only difference between this scenario and scenario 1 is the way Leominster Route 12 is funded. We still carry it in fiscal year 24 in this scenario. However, currently it's what's called advanced constructed over 2 seasons, 2024 and 2025. The reason being is originally when we placed this project on the list, the cost was above the target allotment in any year. So we had to spread the cost out. It's also a rather large project that would take place over multiple construction seasons. So that's how we dealt with it then. However, now due to increased target balances in 2024, we can actually fund the whole thing. which will allow us in this scenario to free up some space down the list. In this case, in 2025, we see a balance of $4.4 million, which when we build this list next year, we would come back and look to place a project in the slot. Would give us more room. It holds all the other projects as they currently are listed in place. And also, we're able to move Fitchburg, reconstruction of John Fitch Highway, and Sterling intersection improvements, Route 140 and 62 into 2028. So, again, the main issue this year is the Leominster project. We have been in contact with Mass DOT, and the district office has been in discussion with right away where the issues lay. And they do agree that it is worth to hold out hope for 2024 with the caveat that we may have to come back and move it back. The reality is we just do not have any other projects ready in time for 2024, so we can't easily replace it. So we wouldn't want to move it back prematurely. So that is why this is the preferred scenario by the JTC and also staff as well. So we're looking for a recommendation on which scenario to develop into our draft tip, which we'll have for the MPO next month.
Great, thank you, Brian. Any questions or comments for Brian? So Brian, are you looking for like a actual vote, like a recommended, and then we'll take a vote, or more just like a verbal consensus on the scenarios?
We can go either way, I believe. It's just we wanted to give the information to people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly one of these scenarios. If anyone has questions on any of these projects or has any other alternatives in mind, we can have discussion. The JTC didn't take a formal vote. It was just more of a consensus recommendation to the MPO. Basically, what I'll do is, based on the comments we received today, we'll develop the list into the draft tip, and next month we'll come back, we'll review what we have, and vote to release it for a 21-day public comment period.
Great. Thanks,
Derek,
Brian. Yeah, go ahead,
if I can
Brett.
interject.
Yeah.
In the past, we haven't taken a vote on the scenarios for the development of the draft. It's basically been a consensus on, okay, go with that scenario and build the draft upon that, and then we'll go from there. So it hasn't been a formal vote on which scenario has been pushed forward for the draft in the past.
Got it. Okay.
And
Sounds
I'll also mention that in the past that we've seen things change as well between March and April, cost increases and that type of thing, which we've been forced to move projects around. So this is just a preliminary thing. So.
Got it. Okay.
Derek,
Yeah, go
just
ahead,
to
Andy.
provide some background on Leominster, you know, at the a higher level in Boston, they've talked, you know, they've had the discussion with right of way, and you know, they are willing to keep it in 24. It will kind of move forward as a high risk project. It's going to take really kind of constant, you know, constant hand on it to keep it moving and make sure things don't kind of go off the rails. I agree that, you know, we just got the latest submission and the price is probably going to go up. So that's probably going to take some effort in the next few weeks to figure out as well. To me, it doesn't make sense to leave it empty. You might as well put Leominster in there. So, you know, there aren't a lot of difference between 1 and 3. So, you know, 3 to me is fine to move forward with, I think.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Ann. And yeah, if there is a cost increase, then it seems like there is always an opportunity to advance construction and use some of the balance in 2025 if needed, depending on the level of the increase. Any other comments? Do other folks agree with scenario 3?
I agree with scenario 3. It seems like the best option.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mark.
I think 3 looks the best.
Sounds good. So sounds like there's general consensus on 3. If anybody does have anything,
Sure.
yeah, go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take this and we'll any new information that comes to us, we'll include it, and we'll develop this scenario or something very similar to it into the draft tip, which we review next month. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for laying it out clearly. Next on the agenda is the Montachusett Federal Fiscal Year 2024 Unified Planning Work Program. I'll turn it over, I think, to Sherry to talk through this one.
Great. Thank you, Derek. So the first, let's see. First thing I wanted to talk about was the memo that went out back on February 2nd, where we solicited for projects from our member communities. The project deadline or request deadline was February 28th. And at that time, we had 3 requests that came in. One was from Groton, which was more of a walkability or a connectivity type of project that they were looking for. Townsend was looking for a Route 119 corridor study in the area of the North Middlesex High School. And then the third one was North County Land Trust was looking for a trail mapping and ground truthing project for their properties for the land trust. We are still in the process of going through those requests to try to weigh our options for our equity analysis, as well as the requirements from the MassDOT and Federal Highway guidance that we received. So we should have a draft project write-up and project selection for the April MPO meeting. And then the next handout was the budget, which also helps us kind of put together what we're doing. And if you look at this, the row that's in blue is the Montachusett funding amounts, and that was updated as of March 2nd. Not sure if anybody saw the previous budget, but that one was not fully updated with the federal FHWA or FTA section 5303 funding, which was adjusted, and then MassDOT had recently sent the newer budget out. And it shows that from 2023 to 2024, there has been an increase of just over $17,000, which is shown in the very last column. So we do have a $944,000 budget, give or take. So we're working with that to try to make sure that all of our tasks add up accordingly. And then at the next MPO meeting as well, we will have along with the equity analysis, the project selections, and then the budgets that will go along with each of the tasks, and the total overall budget, which kind of explains, how each task sections are broken out by. We try to distribute them evenly. So as I said, right now we're still reviewing the equity analysis, which has been completed, but we want to make sure that the task requests go along with the equity analysis, as well as the guidance that we got from MassDOT and Federal Highway. So we are trekking along. We have we're pretty close on our draft, so we should have a presentation next month, and then we will have a draft the following month for review. That's the plan anyway, to go along with the TIP schedule.
Sounds good.
I think that's all I have.
All right. Thanks, Sherry. Any questions or comments for Sherry? All right. Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to seeing that next month as well.
Actually, Derek, can I just add one
ahead.
extra thing?
Yeah.
There has been a couple of communities that have reached out to us after the February 28th deadline that we had for our project requests. And I just want to let people know that we can receive project requests at any time. They may not be incorporated into the next upcoming UPWP, but we will definitely keep them in the background for if there's other types of funding that we receive that those projects might fall into, or for the next 2025 UPWP. It's just, we will accept them at any time. It just, they might not be incorporated just because of the timeline that we're in.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Sherry. All right. Sounds good. Can move on to agenda item 9, which is the Montachusett Regional Transportation Plan. Is this Brad? I'll turn it over to staff to talk through this one.
I'll start off on this one. as you know, we had out a public outreach survey for the plan. The information you have up on the screen right now is not the final numbers. We had an additional group of surveys added into the system just recently. Unfortunately, with the power outages and the mess of yesterday, I wasn't able to update fully all these numbers. But what I can say is this breakdown is based upon 259 surveys that we had at that time. We now have a final count of 294 surveys. So I'll be incorporating those results into this. But basically, from this, you'll see that all of our region's communities sort of responded to our survey. So we've got something from just about everybody. Our next step will be to also go into the preferred ranking on types of projects. Last time on the RTP, we developed some funding scenarios or planning scenarios based upon categories such as road maintenance, safety, bike and ped trails, and so forth. And we asked people to rate the most important for each one, what they thought would be most important for the region. And the result of that was the majority felt roadway maintenance was the highest priority, followed by, I think it was bike and ped, and then safety, and so forth. So we adjusted planning scenarios for funding of projects based upon those that kind of breakdown. So the next step in our survey is to take the results from this survey and compare it to last time and see if there's a change in the priorities for the region, what people prefer to see funded. Just off the top of my head, don't hold me to it as an exact number, but I think roadway maintenance will still maintain its lead, but we'll have to see how the others shake out, and we'll have that presented in the very near future. From that, we will then develop our financial analysis for the RTP and figure out where what types of funds should be allocated for what types of projects for the entire life of the RTP. So that's where this survey stands. I wish I had some more breakdown for you, but we did have, I think we got a pretty significant response back, almost 300 responses. So we felt it was pretty good from everybody, and there's a good representation of responses for the entire region. So, are there any questions on that?
Any questions for Brad? Okay.
Well, then the rest I will turn over to Brian, who's got some little updates on the status of the RTP.
And just actually quickly on the survey, as you can see on this handout, it says air, for example, there were no responses. We were still putting in manually paper surveys that we got from the communities as of last week that aren't reflected in these initial numbers. So I know personally, I manually put in some surveys that we got from air. So there are at least some from air, and I'm sure many others as well. Okay, so we have some preliminary information on the financials of the RTP. And as part of the RTP, we do a financial exercise at the end of it. It's an analysis where we consider some of the needs that we identify within the plan. And we assume what we may receive for federal funding over the life of the plan over 20 years through 2045 in this case. And we do some analysis where we identify those needs and try to allocate funding as an exercise, not necessarily a capital improvement program, but just as an exercise in the plan itself. We get these numbers from Mass DOT. Basically, what they do is they take a baseline from the current federal funding year and they project out over 20 years. And this go around, when we do this update in 2024, what we see, same as what we've seen with the TIP and the target funds recent years, a large increase of federal funds due to the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. In this case, for example, what we assumed for target funding over the 20-year plan from 2020 was $301 million for the region. I know it's hard to see on this spreadsheet, but what we're going to assume for this RTP update And this same category of funds over the 20 years of the plan is $382 million. So that's an increase of approximately 27%. So when we do our financial analysis, we're dealing with more assumed money coming into the region. And of course, we all know inflation is going to play a key role in transportation investments in the future as well. But just like the TIP and what we've seen from some of the other federal programs, we have a larger pot of money to consider in the plan. So that's all I really have. The financial analysis is done at the end of the plan. Typically, we'll finish all the other sections. We'll take some of the recommendations and needs that come up from those sections, and we incorporate it into the financial analysis. And as Brad mentioned, the surveys as well get considered in this analysis as well. So that's all I have for today.
Thanks, Brian and Brad. Is that it on the RTP?
That's all I have on the RTP. Yep. And just as a note, we are on schedule to have a draft in June and final endorsement in July.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. Any questions on the regional transportation plan? All right, seeing none. Thank you again. Next is updates. We can start with MassDOT Highway Division. I'll first turn it over to District 3.
Okay. So for 2023, the Westminster project, which is box widening on Route 140 from Patricia Road to Princeton Lane, that is at PSNE, and it has an an August add date, August 12th. Gardner roundabout construction, that Elm Street, Pearl Street, Central Street, and Green Street, 609279. That is also at PSNE and has an April 22nd add date. The Harvard Route 2 over Nashua River, Tank Road, Boston Main Railroad bridges. That is project 612620. That's at 100%, or I'm sorry, the 100% is due March 16th, and the add date is in May 3rd, 13th. Let's see, Fitchburg, Route 2 resurfacing, 610-731. That was advertised February 4th and was awarded to J.H. Lynch, March 13th. Ashby intersection improvements at Greenville Road, Route 31 and Turnpike Road, 609-314. That was advertised August 27th. The NTP was issued to ET&L last October. That was advertised last August. Gardner Elm Street resurfacing sidewalk improvements. That's our Safe Routes to School project in Montachusett. 610672. That's at 100%. The PSNE is due March 28th, and that has a June 24th add date. And that's it for 2023.
Thanks, Ann. Any questions for Ann? All right, seeing none. I see Daryl's on from District 2. Any updates, Daryl?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So in fiscal year 23, we have just an update on the Templeton project, Templeton Roundabout construction at intersection of Patriots Road, South Main Street, North Main Street, and Gardner Road. That's project 608784. It was advertised on February 11th, and the bid opening is set for March 21st this year. And next we have in FY24, we've got project 608723. This is the Athol intersection improvements at Crescent Street and Chestnut Hill Ave. The design is at 75%. 100% were submitted. Review comments were completed on March 1st, and we're awaiting responses to comments. The PSNE is due on August 3rd, 2023, and the current add date is January 6th, 2024. Next is project 612151. This is Athol Bridge replacement, Route 2A, Main Street over the B&M Railroad. Design is at pre-25. Over-the-shoulder review is anticipated in August 7th, 2023. 25% is due December 4th, and the current add date is December 7th, 2024. And that's all I have for right now.
Great. Thanks, Daryl. Any questions for Daryl? All right, seeing none, we can move on to the next update, which is transit. Any update from Mart?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have one update. The Board of Selectmen for the town of Townsend have voted to petition to join the Montachusett Regional Transit Authority, MART. MART Advisory Board at their scheduled meeting last Thursday, March 9, have voted to accept the town of Townsend as MART new member community. MART region now total 25 communities. This is what I have on transit from MART.
Great. Thanks, George.
You're welcome.
Congrats on expanding the service area.
I know it's 25 now.
Yeah, that's great. Any questions for George? All right, seeing none, we can move on to the Montachusett Joint Transportation Committee.
Okay, thank you. The MJTC met last week on March 8th. As we talked about, discussions focused on the TIP, the UPWP, and the Regional Transportation Plan. The next MJTC meeting will be on Wednesday, April 12th at 2:30 p.m. Then we have a few handouts for your attention. The first is from MassDOT. It's the Northern Tier Passenger Rail Study newsletter for February 28th. The newsletter discusses the study and the next steps in the study process that involves the development of 4 additional potential service plans, also known as alternatives, for passenger rail service along the North Adams, Greenfield, Boston corridor. They will also be looking at various attractors and notable points of interest that could help drive ridership. On the MRPC webpage under announcements, there is a link to a recording of the January 11th public workshop, as well as a copy of this newsletter. And I would encourage people to take a look at that January 11th workshop. The initial plans that the alternative line that they looked at did not include any particular stops in any planned stops between Greenfield and Fitchburg. We brought up the point that Gardner and Athol were key areas that should be addressed and should be looked at for stops. I believe that's going to be rolled into the future alternatives that they'll be looking at, the 4 alternatives they're talking about in this newsletter. But I encourage people to take a look if you're concerned about what's happening with the Northern Tier passenger rail and getting your comments in based upon what you hear at that meeting. The next handout is from the Mass Department of Fish and Games, the Division of Ecological Restoration. They announced a notice of grant opportunity under the Culvert Replacement Municipal Assistance Grant Program. They're seeking proposals from Massachusetts local government units interested in replacing undersized, perched and/or degraded culverts and bridges located in areas of high ecological value. The purpose of the funding is to encourage eligible applicants to replace structures with better designed crossings that meet improved structural and environmental design standards and climate resiliency criteria. In general, and individual awards have ranged from $25,000 to $400,000 for single stream crossing replacements. Depending on the project phases and work proposed, awards of over $200,000 are anticipated for construction projects only. Interested communities should view the full announcement, including funding eligibility and evaluation criteria that can be found on ComBuys. This announcement with appropriate links is also on the MRPC website under announcements. And we did pass this along to our member communities too as a notice, as a PDF file. Next, we received from the Federal Transit Administration a newsletter for FTA Region 1, which covers Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. It highlights some of the new projects and programs that involve FTA. This is also posted on our website, but I think this is something we'll be seeing again in the future as a quarterly newsletter from the Federal Transit Administration. A couple other items. Last month, we held a transportation open forum sponsored by MassDOT, the Health Equity Partnership with North Central Mass with Chana 9. and the MRPC. A large group of interested individuals met to hear about the state's long-range transportation plan, as well as the Montachusett RTP. There were several comments and issues presented by those in attendance. We expect many of those comments will be incorporated into our RTP. A recording of the forum can be found through the MRPC webpage, again, under the announcements section. And then we did receive word from the US DOT that our application for a planning grant under the Reconnecting Communities pilot program for the study of a possible new interchange off of Route 2 at South Athol Road in Athol was not selected for funding. We plan on meeting with the town in the future to discuss other possible options for funding such a planning study, depending upon what the town wishes to do. And then finally, as a heads up, we received a voicemail from MassDOT requesting that we notify our member communities about a MassDOT public hearing for the North Central Pathway Pedestrian Bridge project. The meeting is scheduled for April 25th at 6:30 p.m. We don't have a formal notice yet, but a meeting notice will be sent to us soon, and we'll send it on to all our members and post it on our website to anyone who's interested. And we'll again bring it up at the MJT and MMPO meetings that are coming up. But just to give you a heads up to save the date of April 25th at 6:30 p.m. regarding the North Central Pathway Pedestrian Bridge project. That, and except for one other item, we received an update from the Massachusetts Freight Plan Development Group. An advisory committee meeting is planned for March 23rd, as well as a public info meeting on March 30th. If you're interested, just give us a notice, and we'll send on the full information to you of how to access this and how to link to the meetings. I didn't have time to print that one up for handout today. That is all I have on the MassDOT. MJTC.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Any questions for Brad?
I don't have a question to Brad,
Yeah.
but I can add one thing
Yep.
on the northern tier is MART own and operate from Atoll Old Depot train station and also in the old Gardner Depot train station. They own two locations.
Got it. Thanks, George. All right. We can move on then to the Montachusett Regional Planning Commission updates. Is anyone here from the MRPC to give an update?
I'll take that one.
Okay, yep. Go ahead, Brad. Yep.
Okay. Let's see. The MRPC met last on Thursday, March 9th. Some of the topics discussed included there was a department directors meeting to discuss the delivery of services of existing contracts, oversight of 7 new planning grants that have been awarded to the RPA, and the human resources and consultants that will be needed to complete all planning activities. So these types of meetings will continue throughout the fiscal year. The executive director is considering engaging a firm to provide on-site threat training and safety programs for all employees related to emergency response training, such as active shooter and something along those lines. The executive director and administrative manager met with Protective Advanced Safety Services to learn more about this about this firm's employee safety and threat training services. Our human resources consulting firm, the Employers Association of Northeast, recommended this group to the MRPC. The planning and development director and the executive director met with Molly Singer. She's the CEO and president of Dexterity Management, to review and develop a scope of services and to sign a contract with Ms. Singer so that she could provide grant writing services to the MRPC. So she's now under contract, and that contract will run until June 30th of this year for grant writing assistance for the MRPC. The FY22 audit presentation is set to be made to the Commission on Thursday, March 23rd. And in response to a solicitation issued on February 14th, a total of 2 proposals were received for the use of District Local Technical Assistance Augmentation Funds. The proposals received were from Harvard to collaborate with the Harvard Transportation Advisory Committee and Devens to research and apply for grants for the design and implementation of a pedestrian and bicycling friendly route between Harvard and Devens as part of the Neshoba Regional Greenway Project. And the second one from Townsend to prioritize identified and studied project goals, identify funding resources, and complete grant applications in order to secure implementation funds for those identified prioritized projects. That is briefly the MRPC status report. Any questions?
Thanks, Brad. Any questions? Not seeing any, so thank you. Next is administrative matters. Next MPO meeting, what's the date for that in April?
Wednesday, April 19th at 1 p.m.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. And yeah, that'll be an important one to vote out the tip.
And there's a possibility that it might be an in-person meeting because of the lapsing of the the online meeting requirements, so unless the legislature makes a change. But
Yes.
We'll let everybody know accordingly.
Yep, good point. Yeah, we'll monitor that as well and stay in touch. But either way, we'll make sure that there's a chair in person if it does not get extended. Okay. Anything else under administrative matters or other business?
That's all I have.
Okay. All right. Seeing none. So I think with that, I'll ask for a motion and second to adjourn.
So moved, Jan Sullivan.
I second.
Okay. Thank you. I think without objection, we are adjourned. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back here in April. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.